Welcome back to Baer With Me. I'm your host and executive producer, Luyang Jiang, and we're continuing our three-part special edition celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Baer Faxt. In our first episode, we took you back to where it all began. Josh Baer's bold idea to deliver exclusive art world insights through a weekly newsletter, and how that idea grew into an essential resource for collectors, galleries, and art enthusiasts worldwide. In today's episode, we're shifting gears to explore the pivotal moments that defined the Baer Faxt over the years, the challenges we faced, the risks we took, and the lessons we learned along the way. We will also tackle some big questions about navigating the art world's twists and turns, offering reflections and advice that draw from 3 decades of experience. So whether you have been with us from the beginning or just joined the journey, thank you for being part of this celebration. Let's dive into part 2. A few of our followers asked specifically, any advice for artists or collectors looking to begin their journey outside the main market?
Those are 2 very different questions.
Yes. Which one you want to take first? Artists?
Okay, here's the dilemma for artists. Most of you should make art for fun, find something creative to satisfy you, because you have a better chance of making it into the NFL. Okay, so that's a basic fact. There's 3 million artists in America, maybe 5 or 10 million in the world. I often say, how many artists can any of us name from the Renaissance? And it ranges from 0 to 5. And the Renaissance is thought of the greatest period of art. And how do we expect people to reach that level? I often have an argument with Jerry Saltz, because Jerry's interested in mediocre art because he was a bad artist. And I was raised by great artists. And I'm interested in great art. Now, here's the rub. So all of you should probably stop making art, but some of you shouldn't. And if you believe that you have something really to share and communicate to the world, and you have no choice but to do it, do it. So it's not for me to say to 2.99 million, you're out, and the 3 of you, you're in. That's for the artist to do. Unfortunately, it's become kind of a middle-class job, kind of a bourgeois thing to be an artist. And your parents read about Basquiat selling for millions, so maybe you can do it. So we sort of encouraged people to do it, that there's a career. Your art schools have charged you $200,000 to do it. So, oh my God, I better make this work. And what a dilemma. I'd hate to be an artist now. It's like, how do I know? And maybe it takes you 30 years. I think Lichtenstein did his first show after 40. I mean, there's especially women artists who wait till they're 80 to be discovered. I mean, it's brutal out there. Now, there's more art, maybe 1,000 artists who are making a living from their art around the world, maybe 5,000. I don't know. It's tiny. And you can't all be art professors. So what a choice. I mean, on the one hand, I may be brutal. On the other hand, I'm being really more honest with you than anybody else.
Now, when we talk about artists, we have to think about galleries. You had a gallery and you represent artists before. Now the world is very brutal, as you mentioned. When we look at the galleries, there are mega galleries, and there are middle-sized and small galleries. And now with the economy and all the recent art fairs and events I went to, I hear lots of concerns from the smaller scale galleries. And also I hear from artist side, some artists question the model of artists and gallery representations. And some artists, probably more established ones, challenge that model. I wonder, what's your view on that? Do you think there should be fewer galleries?
I think we make a big deal of galleries closing. Galleries for decades have opened and closed. It's natural. I think we realized that the lifespan is generally around 8 to 10 years of either you start to have the rewards or you're worn out. The danger traditionally for the small galleries was if they had a success, they can't keep the artist. So I think it's a really internal dialogue of like, what am I good at as a gallery? What are my aspirations? How do I define success? Do I define success that I can put on great shows and I can keep the doors open? That's pretty good, and then you can pay your taxes and, have a 2-week vacation a year and pay your rent. That's pretty successful. Then there's the definition of at what personal expense am I working 18 hours, 7 days a week? So I think you have to sort of understand, am I a hustler? Am I a big entrepreneur? Am I better at business? Am I better at art? I mean, the great galleries are great at business and art. Me as a gallery, I was really good at the art. Oh, I had a major figure come up to me yesterday, and it was I'm going to say a top 20 collector. He was saying what shows they saw. And he said, I was in Chelsea, and the best show I saw was by an artist named Lorna Simpson. I said, that's interesting. Do you know I was her first dealer back like 30 years ago? And they went, you had a gallery? I said, yeah, I had a gallery. And for like 6 years, I was her primary dealer, and I sold hundreds of them. And they were kind of shocked. So part of that is a lot of people don't even know I had a gallery. And back then, there'd be one artist, one main dealer. And right now, for successful artists, there might be one artist, 6 dealers. So they're taking more control of what they're doing. Even younger artists need to keep an eye on what's going on. And it's more fluid because they can communicate through social media. They can create their own websites. They can do all sorts of other things to replace the galleries. The role of the galleries now has much more become sales, and they used to be career management and for exhibitions. And now their primary role is sales.
What do you think of the art fair model? Is this going to change following what you were just saying about galleries?
Well, when I was doing art fairs, and I did them 3 or 4 countries, probably did a dozen of them, and I don't think I ever broke even for my costs. So we looked at it as a marketing expense. You could take an ad in Art America, or you could take a booth at the Hamburg Art Fair. And the costs were somewhat greater, but not that much. It was like, okay, the Hamburg Art Fair would be like 6 months of advertising. And we thought, well, I'll meet collectors, I'll meet curators, and that's a long-term view. So it was purely, for most of us, a marketing thing. Prices weren't even that high. Now it's become a huge portion of annual sales for many, many galleries. As much as 60 or 70% of their revenue for some galleries come from the art fairs. It might be 60% of their expenses for the year too, or more. So for small galleries, they pushed all their chips into this pile. It's incredibly fragile. One bad art fair can put a small gallery on the brink of going out of business. And that's dangerous. It can also pay all their bills for 6 months if they do it correctly there. So it's a high risk, high reward thing. Plus, there's over 300 art fairs around the world. I don't know if there still are, but it got to that level depending on how you define them. It's like, okay, what kind of smart business decision are we making? And remember, most galleries aren't very good at business. So they're forced into these high-end, risky business decisions that maybe they're not prepared for. I venture to say 90% of galleries don't even have a budget. I never did. Maybe as a gallery, you should have a budget.
I always feel like the galleries, the smaller one, medium-sized one, they feel like I don't have other choices. I have to keep going. Or is that because they are too afraid to try something new because nobody has done it?
I think they're saying today I should make a budget. Wait a second, the shipper came in, the artist called, the walls need painting. What are we doing for the press release? I'll do the budget tomorrow. And I'm sympathetic to that. They have a lot on their plate and they're understaffed. And artists, they probably should have a budget too. But art school didn't teach them how to do that. Art school didn't teach them how to balance a checkbook. And art school didn't teach them all sorts of things. So they're ill prepared too. I mean, the successful ones, they have a studio manager, they have an agent, they're managing. And that's 1/100% of artists. And everybody's just like putting a finger in the dike, figuring out what they're going to do today because it's leaking. What else does our audience want to know from me?
Well, Christie's now former CEO, Luyang Jiang, wants to know, what has been the most unexpected change in the market during your 3 decades of running the Baer Faxt, the one that nobody could have predicted?
That no one could have predicted. That's kind of a high bar, Guillaume, of like what no one predicted that now we saw, because we're all predicting lots of stuff that didn't happen. I think I'll answer it a little differently. What are some of the best unexpected things that have happened due to circumstances that we should have predicted and didn't? Would be sort of how I would phrase it. And thank you, Guillaume from Paris, frequent listener. I would say that the demographic of the collector has changed quite a bit to a lot more women who are collecting art, often by women artists, but not exclusively. And I would say some of my most interesting clients over the last number of years have been women from finance who've been very successful, and they behave differently, but they don't just collect work by women, but some do. And then I would add to that, in America, African Americans collecting Black art has been significant. And I don't know that we should have anticipated that. But as the wealth demographic changed, that's really been pronounced and significant and to the better. What are the most unexpected things that happened?
NFT?
Well, the NFTs weren't unexpected. You'll laugh. So 30 years ago, I was like trying to figure out what to do. And I met some gallery and I said, listen, I have this idea. They were doing something on the internet that didn't even exist hardly. And I said, I have this idea. Imagine that you were on vacation in Hawaii and you bought a painting at the hotel for like $5,000. There's no place to sell this painting. You can't go back there. I said, what if we created a website that some poor guy sitting in his underwear in Birmingham, Alabama could say, I like that painting. It doesn't have Castelli Gallery. It doesn't have all that information, but it was really, we should create a website that's consumer to consumer. And somebody did create that and they called it eBay. Okay. So I sort of think that I had the idea for eBay before eBay. Now, what's interesting is about 10 years ago, the CEO of eBay became my client. And I took on a consulting role with eBay, they didn't realize that I invented them, but many billions of dollars in market share later, I didn't quite patent the idea. So I came to them and like they were trying to create like how to sell art to 150 million people. And I like saying, no one wants, a sailboat painting. And I said, I have this idea. It's like, we should take the lead on making unique digital art that you could own on your phone or your computer made by artists that was only sold in that format. And I could get the new museum, they're doing digital thing. Why don't we create this thing and you can have 100 of these things? And the CEO kind of thought it was interesting. And the rest of the team went, you're out of your mind. So basically that was NFTs. So I invented NFTs and I invented eBay. Unfortunately, with some ideas, if you're too early, there is a lesson to this. I was too early with those ideas. So everybody kind of laughed at me and I had no power. But in my mind, I predicted NFTs and I predicted eBay. So Guillaume, I predicted NFTs before you guys knew how to spell NFTs.
Well, how come you didn't think about just go out? And then if that audience didn't believe you, you should have looked for investor or start a second company. Then we have another Baer Faxt company here.
Because I was plugging the holes. No kidding. It's like painting the walls.
Now, there's another question talking about globalization. I wanted to touch that topic. So this question is, as the art world becomes increasingly globalized, do you see the concentration of wealth/influence diffusing across a larger population, reconcentrating in other markets like Asia, or being maintained roughly where we see it today?
A huge part of the market has been and still is the US. Some people say China's as big. I think it depends on how you define the market. So if you're including work that's historically Chinese, that's different. It's probably 80% of the market that we call China is not Western art as we think of it. It's certainly a much bigger sign of global wealth. Phrase it a different way. 30 years ago, of the Fortune 100 CEOs, probably 5 of them collected art. And those 5 were made fun of. Like, what are you doing? Why do you have that squiggly thing that looks like a blackboard on your wall? And that was a Cy Twombly, and their friends made fun of them. Okay. Now, 99 of those CEOs collect art. And maybe they took an art class or their spouse, their husband took one in college and said, oh, that's a Cy Twombly. Let's have one. So it's not just global. It is, which it is. It's the Middle East and Asia and all parts of the world. But it's also, I think, spread across the 1% of the 1%. That's really the spread is towards them, whether they live in Saudi Arabia or Hong Kong or, Fresno, California.
I think when we talk about art market, you're answering the question mainly from the business and market perspectives. And then I want to go back to artists. Like you said earlier, if there's no artist, no art, and there's no art market. Since when you start looking at a little bit outside New York and US, more towards a different region, I assume you are always very connected with London, like European, it's kind of logical and then closer to home. But since when you start looking at Asia, and what is Asia to you like when you start paying attention or start thinking about it, and compared to what you see Asia now?
I'm not equipped to understand the art of Asia, most of it, because there's a real cultural history that would require a lot of attention for most of the art that's being made, whether it's in Japan, which has one history, or Korea with a different history, or China with another history, not to mention all the other regions. So I'm trying, on the one hand, looking for artists there that have what I think of as a universal message. So that's limiting. I think it's important that every region, talking to actually one of our investors who spent a lot of time in Saudi Arabia, and people in Saudi Arabia have leaned into collecting art made in Saudi Arabia. And I think that's great. And they'll do a better job of that than I will walking there, trying to figure out which one's best. What I'm more invested in is like trying to understand how they may look at art in Saudi Arabia that's historically here, and how they might understand it and how we explain it in a way that might be different than it's understood in Paris or Beijing. So it's, for me, my focus is like, how do I understand what they're doing as a culture without trying to say I'm an expert in Saudi Arabian art? Because at this stage in life, I'm not going to be able to do that. I might be able to focus on one and really get to know them and focus, or several, because somebody I respected said, hey, you got to look at these 2. They're the best. So me personally, I'm looking at not 100 artists from Saudi or 500 artists from China. I need to sort of like narrow in personally on a couple, but I need to understand the structure of it and help people My job isn't to tell you what to buy. My job is to help you figure out how to go about getting the information to figure out what to buy. My job is not to tell you as an artist what to make. My job is to help you understand the possibilities of how to communicate to the world and for you to figure out how to do it.
What you just said remind me my panel and my conversation in Singapore. When I had lots of conversation with our friends and our work friends in Singapore, one of the things they mentioned a lot is that the art ecosystem in there, how do people from more kind of Western perspectives to so generalized it? And which is the region, we're talking about Southeast Asia, not just China or Asia. That's even more complicated, right? So what troubles then is that people from outside calling that region as Southeast Asia and as just one general term. What you just said, I think it's exactly what they wanted to understand how outside to look at them. I don't think they expect you to understand them, but they are curious to see how would you start to research or to learn about them and how, because, the Baer Faxt, and they see us as a quite important platform to introduce, to connect, as you said, to communicate with the bigger audience. So what can we do while we're still learning about that region, whether it's Southeast Asia or Asia in general, whether it's China, South Korea, or Japan? What can we do? And what kind of roles that Baer Faxt can play?
Well, two things. Baer Faxt is no longer equal Josh Baer. So that's an important factor. Two, Josh Baer, within his role there, has 2 ears and 1 mouth. So I have to listen. And I think people in Asia are a little stunned that I come there to listen. And what I like to do on my panels there is I say, what is it about your region that you know that you'd like me to know that I don't? So I start sometimes that. And then I think the audience is a little surprised that I'm doing that because they're used to people coming and lecturing. And then I say, okay, part 2 is what do you as an audience or as a panelist want to understand about my quote unquote part of the art world and the art business? So we build a dialogue on individual knowledge and trying to share. Now, that's me personally, how I deal with it. Now, the Baer Faxt has a different setup. So I stayed away from Asia professionally because just this reason, I show up in Hong Kong, Art Basel, and I was like, okay, I know Sadie Coles and I know David Zwerner. And here I am, this, white hair old guy from New York wandering around the art fair. And I understand what I know, but it's not like some Hong Kong billionaire is going to say, hey, who's that guy with the white hair? He's my art advisor. Let's go. That wasn't going to happen. So it's so am I going to spend the time and money to go there to see things I already know with no opportunity? So I often say, it's I can't put me as a square peg into a round hole. So then what happened was, okay, the Baer Faxt actually has a lot of insight into those worlds, a lot of access and a lot of knowledge because 2 of our senior staff are actually from there. So it's suddenly, when you're in Tokyo, Luyang, doing a talk about the art world, you're doing it in Chinese to an audience, mostly of Chinese in Japan. I couldn't do that. So we as a business suddenly can do that because we've got a square peg in a square hole. So that's a huge opportunity that no one else has, which is a high level of the ability to integrate the right questions with the right answers. So I'm asking your questions, answering it, and you're asking me questions, even though, both you and Luyang have studied here and lived here and have certainly a lot of knowledge about the West, but you have unique knowledge to our business about the East. And maybe together we can all learn the Middle East because that's our next region to deal with. And then we're both going there, or the team's going there with Eastern knowledge and Western knowledge into the Middle East. And that's we're going to need 4 ears and 2 mouths.
And that concludes part 2 of Baer With Me, our special edition celebrating 30th anniversary of the Baer Faxt. Today, we reflected on the defining moments and lessons that have shaped this platform, offering a deeper understanding of the challenges and achievements behind the scenes. In our next and final part of this series, we'll turn our gaze to the future. What's next for the Baer Faxt and the art world? We'll explore how new technology, fresh voices, and emerging trends are paving the way for the next chapter. Thank you for listening to Baer With Me, a mini-series of the Baer Faxt podcast. I'm your host and executive producer Luyang Jiang. Our head of content is Boiliang Shen, our associate editor is Patrick Hill, and our audio editor for this episode is Andy Lane. We would love to hear your thoughts, guest suggestions, or topics you would like us to explore. Email us at info@thebaerfaxt.com or DM us on Instagram. Until next time, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to celebrating the final chapter of this journey with you.